So this is the basic instructions for putting together the water pump assembly, the individual pieces and parts. So basically, the main thing we start with is producing the A valve. You have to use a small piece of PVC pipe, some PVC reducers, and then you have a rubber sleeve that goes inside the PVC tube. You have to slide that in first. You have the PVC pipe and the sleeve goes all the way through. It goes through both ends. You have to loop it over the ends, and then the cap's covered on each side. And then you have a nipple, 90-degree nipple that gets threaded into the side of the pipe. We have to drill the hole and thread the hole as well to accept the fitting. The fitting screws in to that hole there. Once you've gotten it all put together and glued the ends on over the sleeve that's inside the tube, everything should look basically like this. You glue it together, you'll have air fed in, which inflates that bladder to cut the water pressure on and off. And then once you've done that, you've gotten the A valve together, you'll take and cut pieces of PVC tube or rubber tubing like this. There's certain lengths for each section they go on. You cut it to length, and then it gets glued. One piece gets glued into each side of the A valve. This is going out to the patient. This goes to the water pump side. Once you've gotten that assembled, then you'll take actual water pump. This is a one-way valve to allow the water to only go up, and it won't come back once the water pump shuts off. We take and attach that onto the water pump itself here at the base. Been gluing it on. Once that's glued in place, then you would take the pipe here, and that gets slid on to, well, you have a clamp that goes on. You put the clamp onto the hose, then you slide the pipe on to the one-way valve. You would push it down further enough to get the clamp on there, and then that clamp gets crimped down to hold that connection in place. Once you've gotten that done, then you actually take, and on the other end, you put in, it's an adapter piece, you slide that into the hose, and then that actually goes through the cap that caps off the water pump that goes down into the water tank. And then you put another section of hose up here for the patient to be able to connect their hose to, and then that gets another clamp up here as well to hold it in place. Once you've gotten all that taken care of, then you have your wire for the water pump. It gets ran through the top as well. You run it through, and then you have your plug here that you have to take apart. You have your DIN connector here that you would end up wiring the two connections into the plug there. You solder them in, and then once you've got it soldered, then you put it all back together to end up with the plug soldered onto the end and back together just like that on the outside of the cap. And once you've gotten that all completed, then you have your one piece of small 1/4 inch type size air hose that also gets ran through the cap as well. And then this is what comes down and connects into the A valve itself to operate it from the controller. The pressure comes down from the controller, inflates and deflates that valve as needed, or that bladder inside there as needed, to help control the water pressure or help pulse the pressure for the patient. Once you've gotten all that together, you should have a completed water pump that looks like this. You zip tie the cords together to keep them held in, so when you slide it down into the water tank, it doesn't get bound up in any way. And then on the outside of the tube, you should have the hose where the customer connects their connection to the patient in. And you have your air hose that goes to the controller. and then your plug that goes to the controller as well. All right, this is the direct power supply assembly. So basically, we have a few things that, mainly the brackets that have to be manufactured by us in-house here for this one. And then we've got some soldering and connections we have to do. As far as the bracketry goes, you've got the two brackets that hold down the actual power supply itself. One bracket that holds the plug into the power supply to make sure the customer can't pull that out once it's mounted. And then you have two brackets here that get attached in the back that the customer can wrap the cord around, and then you've got your back plate that gets mounted to the trolley itself to contain everything together. In order to make the brackets, we take aluminum flat stock. It's a 3/4 and 1/2 inch piece, depending on which bracket we're making. We take those, cut them to length, and then we'll actually bend them by hand best we can with the vise and make the brackets. This is one of the brackets that holds the power cord on each end. Once they're bent, then we take and spray paint them with the black spray paint. And then the cord ends will actually take these rubber sleeves. Once they're mounted onto the board, we run the rubber sleeve over the outside of it here just to cover that up as well, and make it a little more presentable, and so that the cord attaches a little easier as well and holds in place, and you don't worry about cutting the cord. But those just slide down and over to give it a nice appearance. But once you've got those brackets made, then we move on to, we have to take the power block itself and we cut the cord here to get rid of the straight plug that's on here, and then we'll solder back in a 90-degree plug, along with, we solder in a fuse holder here to put a little 4-amp quick blow fuse in. We put this in as a precaution in case something runs too long, water pump runs too long or something like that. Hopefully this blows before any damage is done to anything else. That's the theory, at least. So we cut this here, then we'll solder into both ends into the fuse holder. This actually comes apart, snaps in half, and then inside you have the two metal pins. You'll actually take the positive wire on both ends and solder those in, and then that connection gets put back together, and then the fuse goes in between the two positive sides of the cable. And then that gets snapped back together, and then the fuse would go into the top right there. And then that fuse is in line with the system there now. And then you would use two small, just little plastic wire clamps, and we use that to actually clamp the wire down onto the board. We just use stainless steel machine screws along with nuts on the back to hold everything in place. We do also have to take the board itself. Once everything is soldered together, done, the board comes as one whole flat piece, and then we have to drill and make the slots in the board for where the brackets go. And then you have to drill your holes. We start with the 2 holes here at the top for these brackets. Once we get the bracket in place, then we'll drill the next 2 holes down here, mount that through, and then for this mount, we put it on, mark the holes, then drill them, and then put it in that way. And then, like I said, finished product is power supply mounted with the 2 brackets. You've got your power cord coming down. It is bracketed in so it cannot move once assembled. And then the main cord and power cord get wrapped around the 2 brackets there. and then you mount the fuse right here below it with the two clamps on each side of it there. And then you have a warning label as well that we have to stick on to the plate. But that is, you know, once you get it all put together, that is what it should look like in the end. All right, so this is the controller box assembly. This is the main heart of the whole system, controls all the individual components. So you would start with getting everything together. We've got our case that the whole thing goes into. The case comes from one manufacturer. It is actually technically the front, same in back. It's easier to manufacture that way, and we just have pieces to cover things up once it's finished to make it look as if it's two different pieces for the most part. The insides are injected the same as well. That way you uniformly make one and you can use it for either side, so it doesn't matter which one you start with, but you would take one half of the case and then use that and start assembling the pieces on. Normally you start with, first step is taking the actual keypad itself. It has a 3M backing on it, adhesive, buttons are pre-wired and everything with the ribbon connector attached. You actually take that and on your front of your case you run the ribbon through the slit right there at the top. You'd slide it down, and then once you got it into place, you take and you would peel back the sticker to reveal the adhesive, and then just start at the top and push it down and flatten it out best you can to get it to stick well. Once you've gotten it flattened out as well, then we take and put some silicone right around the edge of it just to help seal that edge, to make sure no moisture can get in as well, to help get that, hold that in place and keep any moisture from getting into the system. And then once that's in place, then you flip over, you see your ribbons come through the other side here. So that's waiting to be connected to the circuit board once you get that together. So then we would set that down on the table and then get a circuit board. Circuit boards, when they come in, they are attached together with a seam right in the center here. You actually take and slowly break that board apart till it comes apart. You have your ribbon connector here in the back connecting the two separate parts of the board together. The board also comes pre-mounted with our two Parker air valves already mounted to the system. These hoses normally would not be here. I've already put these on just for display purposes. I'll go through what all those go to here in a minute as well. But basically, once you've broken your circuit board apart, then you take and lay it down into the box. And there are pre-drilled holes on the circuit board. There's 3 on the lower part, and then you've got 5 pre-drilled holes up here at the top part. Those are all your mounting locations. The box inside has the stanchions already built in with the grommets already set into the plastic for you, so you can see where all the mounting locations are that the circuit board screws into. So you take your circuit board, like I said, lay it down inside the box and do your best to get it to line up with those holes. And then also you want to check and make sure that your connections are lining up here at the bottom, and then also that the boards or the screens are lining up inside the holes right there as well. And then that would actually go display through the circuit board like that once it's together. Once you've got the holes lined up, you've got 3 screws of the smaller size, like I said, that go into the bottom board here to hold it in place. And those just get screwed down. You can't really see. You just screw those in. I'm not going to put them all in, but you've got one more that goes there, one more that goes there to secure all that in. Once you've gotten that in place, you've got your top board up here. Same thing. One screw only in it to hold things in place temporarily. Just loosely screw that one in so it holds it in place. And then for the 4 other holes here on the top of the board, we have these standoff that we screw in. This is going to hold the air pump that goes inside. This is the air pump. This will hold that up off the board and give it the spacing that it needs. But you have 4 of these that you have to screw in. Normally we would take a pair of pliers and actually tighten them down a little bit more, but for display purposes, just getting them in there so you can get an idea. So those get screwed down, held into place, and then basically that's what mounts your 2 boards into place. Holds those in. They're not going anywhere at that point. Your ribbon for your keypad, like I said, it would be sticking through, and you would go ahead and run it around, and it gets connected to the pin connector at the top of your board here. So that way your keypad will communicate with the circuit board and give it all the information that it needs. So once you've got all that together, then you would proceed to mounting the water pump onto the stanchions. In order to do that, you have to start with taking the water pump itself. You have rubber grommets that go in each 4 of these holes around the air pump. So you have to take and push these grommets through. Make sure they go through on both sides. That's to help with the vibration of the air pump once it's running. But you get those all in place, and then that pump, you'll actually have 1 screw, and it gets a washer on each side. So you end up with a washer underneath the grommet and one on top of the grommet as well to help compress that together. But you would take and put the air pump onto the grommet, or onto the stanchions, and then run your screws down just until they start to kind of depress that rubber a little bit. You also put Loctite on the screw as well to help with the vibration and make sure they don't back out in the long run. So you would do that in all 4 corners. I'm just going to do 2 just to hold it in place, but you would have 4 screws there to hold that in place. And then you always have to make sure your wires go up towards the same way that the ribbon is for the keypad. These 2 wires, once these air pumps come in, we test them. We decide which wire needs to be connected to the positive and which one needs to be connected to the negative. The positive one, we wrap a piece of shrink tube around it, red shrink tube, so we know which one it is. That way it makes it easier to identify. The red one always gets put into the farthest slot over to my right, video left, and then that pin gets pushed down. Then the other wire, same, just gets slid into the slot here, and then pushed down and held into place that way. And that connection is done. That way the pump will get its signal to know how to operate. Once you've got your pump in place, then you start hooking up your hoses that go from the air pump down to the controller valves. You have 1 bigger 1/4 inch piece of hose that connects from the pump itself down to the T valve right here. And then you would actually get a small zip tie right here to help clamp that down and hold that in place and also help try to seal that up. The nipple on this T-valve is a little bit smaller than the hose, so you want to try to seal that up best we can. And then once that's connected into the T-valve, you run your two smaller hoses down to the tops of the valves themselves. You get those in place, and then you'll run your hoses coming from the valves themselves over to the nipples, which are these pieces here. And then this is what the customer will actually connect their air hoses to on the outside of the box. Normally, before, they were using this bigger hose over these smaller nipples and using a zip tie on them to help seal it off. They were also putting another smaller piece of tube over the nipple itself to help seal up. The main reason they were using the bigger tube was because it was easier to get the nipple inside of. But I found that to be a little much, too much possibility of losing air pressure, because all they were doing was putting a zip tie around them to help seal it up. I know they did have the smaller piece of hose in there as well to help with the sealing also. All I did was take the existing hose that we have, and you just have to work it a little bit more, but you can get it onto the end of this valve or the end of the nipple and get it to seal much better without the use of any zip ties or anything. Don't need zip ties here on these nipples, don't need zip ties here on these as well. They just slide and compress on, so you don't have to worry about that. Once that's connected, that sits down into the slot that's pre-cut in the case here. And that valve goes into there, holds that in place, and then you run your hose over to the coinciding Parker valve, depending on which port you're connecting. You have an A valve and a B valve that goes to each of the A and B valves that are down either in the water tank, or you have the other B valve that's connected with the supplied items for the customer. Those two valves control the water pressures in different scenarios depending on what you're doing. But you would connect those into the coinciding bottom valve on each one. This one goes to this side, and then you have the one hose that jumps from that bottom valve over to this side, along with the other nipple on that. Once you've gotten all of your air hoses hooked up properly, the inside of the case is done. From that point, you would then just take the back case. You have the cutouts here as well for the nipples, so you know you can use that to help make sure you line everything up properly. And then it just kind of sits down right on top. Obviously, make sure all your hoses are inside. Sits down on top. And then the way it lines up, you put a screw in one side, opposite corners, flip it over, and you put a screw in each opposite corner. So there's 4 screws, 2 on the front, 2 on the back, that hold it all together. And then once you've gotten all the screws in to hold it together, then we have grommets that get pushed down into the hole to help cover up all the holes around the outside. And then we also have a piece of black plastic that's stuck on the back here to cover these pieces up. And then we have some trim pieces to cover this up as well here at the bottom, so you don't see those, you don't have the open holes there, and there's no way for the water to get in as well. Once you have all that together, this is the finished piece. This is what it looks like. Then we'll also go in and we attach a cord bundler onto the outside of it. This is so that the customer can use their remote button, wrap it up, and hang it on the side once it's on the trolley. You do also have your A and B valve labels that we put on the front. This lets the customer know this is the one where you connect into your A valve air connection. This is the one where you connect your B valve air connection into. So that's labeled on the outside for them to easily see that. But that's basic installation or basic directions for putting those together. So this is the remote control button assembly. There's not a whole lot to it. We pre-order these remote control buttons. They come already assembled for the most part. The only thing that we have to do is attach the DIN plug onto the end of the wires here. So basically all we do is we take the plug itself, comes apart. You have your case pieces that go around the actual DIN plugs themselves. You have your mounting connections here at the back. We actually go through and cut off most of these protruding pins down to, we leave the 3 bottom ones here. And then we actually end up using these 2 outer bottom ones to connect the wires into. You actually end up having to snip the ends of these wires off and go in and reduce the amount of wires that are there because they're too thick to actually fit into the ends of these as they are. So we have to reduce them down, re-twist them, and then re-solder them to make them a nice solid connection. Once you do that, then you actually take and slide it down into the end of the cup here. It goes down inside there. And once it's down inside there, then you heat it up and run your solder down inside as well to make that connection permanent to where you don't get any movement coming out, and it makes the connection in there that it should. Once we've got that solder, we also take and put, we have a piece of shrink tube we run back over to seal that whole connection up as well. Once you get that done, then you have to slide your DIN connector back in with the wires in it, twist it. This crimps down over the bottom of the 2 wires, and then you put your top back on here. Then once you've got that together, you take and slide all that back into the case here, and that snaps around the outside there. And then you're supposed to have this on the wire, and then that slides up and over to complete that and finish it out. And that's your done connection. Everything's good to go at that point. You do test it to make sure it operates correctly. But once all that's together, you basically end up with a finished piece that looks like this. This is a slightly older connection, but it's the same thing, same type DIN connection in there. That slides into the controller itself, and then the customer uses this remote to activate and deactivate the modes of the controller so everything operates correctly. But that's basically it for the remote. That's all we do is just attach that end onto it. This is just kind of an overview of the final assembly, full assembly of the trolley and all the kind of individual components that go into it. Gone over the previous videos of how to make some of the individual components. This piece here that's on the table that connects to the water pump and then to the controller, this is part of the PyPack disposable assemblies we send out to the customers. This is actually what goes into the body of the customer as well. This piece inserts up inside, and then once it's inside, we provide a bulb here that's used for inflating the end of the speculum. This is called the speculum right here at the end. This goes on side, or goes onto the hose here, and then that blows up inside the customer, inside the rectal cavity to hold it in place. Once expanded, customer pulls on it just to ensure that it's not going anywhere, and then they can leave the bulb attached, or like they have to keep the air pressure in there. So they keep that attached, turn the knob there to make sure no air comes back out. So that stays up inside the customer. And then fresh water gets fed in through this hose from the water pump up into the customer. This is the B valve assembly itself. It has air pressure going to it in a rubber sleeve inside here. When that air pressure gets sent to it, that valve closes to ensure that no wastewater comes back out of the system when it's not supposed to. This tube runs out to the waste system. The back half of the trolley here holds the waste part. It has a bag that gets put inside of it to catch the waste, so you're not actually pumping into the container itself. It's getting put into a bag, which is then disposable, so you don't have to worry about, there shouldn't be as much cleanup on inside of the tank at that point. So that's the basic B valve assembly, part of the PyPak disposables. The B valve air hose comes over and connects into the B valve portion of the control box. Like I said, the control box sends the air pressure to that valve to tell it when to open and close depending on the mode that the box is in. And then the blue hose comes over and connects into the top of the water pump. So that water pump sends the water up through the hose into the customer. And then the pump also has the A valve down inside of it. That A valve is actuated by the air hose. It comes over and connects into the A valve section of the controller box. That air pressure controls that valve to help it pulse the water once it's inside the customer to help free up any obstructions inside there. And that's determined depending on what mode that the system is put into as to how that reacts. But that's basically how those things connect and what they do. The trolleys themselves come in two different parts. You have basically your controller freshwater tank assembly here, and then they nest together for easy storage, but once you pull them apart, then you have your disposable water, dirty water tank here. Like I said, it gets a bag inserted down into it, and then it comes out the front here for this hose to connect into. So the waste runs straight into the bag inside the container here. It also, the wastewater tank, when these tanks come in, they're just straight plain tanks. They have a top to them, but they're completely solid throughout the rest of the way, aside from they get grommets molded into the bottom of them for us to be able to attach this bar to here. They have 4 grommets, but we only use 2 of them. This bar gets attached. It's made by the same manufacturer that makes the frames. We use 2 bolts up inside the grommet there to hold that in place. This is for helping the caregiver or patient or whoever be able to tilt the tank once it's done so they can dispose of it into a proper receptacle. This is made to fit around most toilets as well, so you slide it over the toilet, they tilt it up, they're able to dump the waste out into the toilet as it is. We also provide a Velcro strap here that would get Velcroed onto the strap here in the back. That enables them to strap it in place to let it drain so they don't have to sit there and hold it the whole time. On this particular tank, we drill the hole for the wastewater to come out of. We install this grommet inside that hole to keep any abrasion from happening on the plastic bags and causing them to possibly mess up. We also take and drill holes in the sides of the tank. We run bolts out, put some grommets on it, and that gives us our leverage for the tank to be able to tilt. The frame manufacturers weld on the connection points for the tank itself. We have the rubber sleeves that we slide down over. Same here, we slide that one on. They're bare when they come to us. The frame manufacturer also welds on the connection for the wheels. The wheels do not come on it when it comes to us. We get the wheels supplied from any manufacturer and we bolt those on, and put the caps over the top of it to cover the ends of the bolts to keep it from snagging on anything, and also for appearance purposes. The back of the wastewater tank also holds the quick connect hose, or the quick fill hose. We use a cord bundler on it to hold it in place when the customer's not using it. This connection comes with an adapter to where you can put the adapter on your sink or faucet in your house. You quick connect this to it, and then you can quick fill the freshwater tank itself from your hose or from your faucet. Makes it easier. The tank can stay in the cart, and you just fill it from your faucet into the tank. The lid on this one obviously screws off as well, just like the other one. So that's the basic concept of the wastewater trolley there. And then as far as your freshwater trolley goes, freshwater / controller trolley, it has a few different components that get put together. Like I said, the tank comes as a full tank, nothing drilled or anything when it comes in. For this particular tank, we have to drill the hole for the water pump tower. This tower that is down inside the tank there is just a piece of furniture grade PVC tube that we take, cut a 45-degree end on the bottom. We drill some holes to help with water running inside as well, and then that gets slid down inside, and then the water pump assembly gets slid down inside of that and capped off there at the top. So that hides that down in there. The pump comes all the way to the bottom and is down here and pulls the water from there up through the tube and up inside here. So we drill that hole, put the grommet in, slide the piece of tubing down inside that, and that is for the water pump section of it. And then on this part of the tank here, get these out of the way, we drill a hole and put another small grommet inside of it there. That holds the thermometer down into the water tank. The water temperature is recommended to be right around 102 degrees. Right? The warmer water, hotter water is supposed to help with hydrating the bowels of the customer, and any impactions is supposed to help loosen that up. So we give the customers the thermometers, that way they can try to monitor the temperature of the water going into the patient. So those are the two things that we do on this tank for the freshwater tank. We drill those two holes and put those grommets in, and then the water pump tower as well. We also apply the logo to the front of the tank as well. That way when it's all put together, you obviously know who it's by. And then on the back of the trolley is where we mount the power supply, the direct power supply. Basically, it's made to change the voltage from the 120 in your house down to 12 volts for the system. But it gets mounted, like I said, previous video we showed you we mounted it to the board. Well, once it's on the board, then we have to mount it to the frame itself. In order to do so, we put it up here, clamp it in place, drill 4 holes, and then run the 4 screws into the frame to hold it in place. They're all stainless steel screws, all mounting hardware, anything on this whole trolley assembly, screws, bolts, nuts, are all stainless steel, just to make sure that nothing rusts and it's medical approved. So once you get that mounted on, then you also have your top mounting piece here. So the top mounting board holds your accessories container. What comes in that is you've got your inflation bulbs for the speculum, and then you also have some connections to help seal off the different hoses to hold the pressures when needed. So the instructions follow or tell you how to use those as well. But that container holds those items, gets mounted there as well. and then your controller gets mounted to this also. This is just like the direct power supply. We clamp it to the bar, drill our 4 holes, run the screws in, and that mounts it to that, and then we use our Velcro pieces to hold the controller on, and then also same with the box that gets Velcroed on. So the controller box gets mounted onto that. This box gets mounted to this side, and then we also put on a retractable cord holder here that attaches to the quick start guide that we make to give the customer the instructions on how to quickly run the system if they need to. If they have any questions, they can look at this, and gives them a rundown of how to use the system. But that gets attached also with a Velcro, small piece of Velcro at the back and on the cord retractor itself. That just gets mounted to the bottom section there. And then once everything's connected, it's just a matter of once the customer needs to use it, they just plug everything in. You got your power, your remote button, and your water pump connections get connected into the controller itself. And then, of course, you hook your freshwater hose here. Your A valve gets connected to this side. And the B valve hose gets connected to that side. And then the wastewater hose would get ran over and connected into the wastewater tank to the bag inside. And then once that's all connected and inside the customer, it's ready to start being used at that point. Obviously the tank would be filled as well at that point. But that's the basic rundown, and then once the customers are done with everything, they just take 2 carts, they just slide them back together. That way they can store them wherever they need to, out of the way, and then that's basically it.